Here they are, here they are." With those words, an unknown French sailor set a chain of events in motion. It was 1793, and a small expedition hunting for the lost navigator La Pérouse slid into a Tasmanian bay. On the shore stood the Lyluequonny people, who had survived 12,000 years of isolation and whose last encounter with Europeans had ended in gunfire. This time, a naturalist named La carried notebooks instead of muskets. "You'll see how fear turned into fascination, how biscuits and shell necklaces bridged worlds, and why this forgotten meeting matters. Stick around, give us a like, share with a mate, and hit subscribe. This yarn is just getting started." Before we wade into the gentle surf at Recherche Bay, let's wind the clock back. European eyes had only glimpsed this rugged island a handful of times. Dutchman Abel Tasman sighted it in 1642, but never met a soul. In 1772, the French navigator Marc-Joseph Marion Dufresne made landfall. His gifts were misunderstood, and his men soon exchanged spears and stones for musket fire, leaving at least one Tasmanian dead. 5 years later, James Cook swung by, left gifts, and avoided conflict. Those memories lingered on the coast. Now leap forward to 1793. 2 ships, Recherche and Espérance, slip into the sheltered waters of what will become known as Recherche Bay. Admiral d'Entrecasteaux is on a humanitarian mission to find the missing La Pérouse, but his crew includes scientists and artists hungry for knowledge. Among them is La a passionate naturalist whose later book would become an international bestseller. With him are the artist Jean Piron, the botanist Claude Riche, and sailors fresh from revolutionary France. On their first voyage here the year before, they'd explored, repaired their ships, and even planted a garden. Now they return in January 1793, and this time they aren't alone. Smoke curls up from the forest. Footprints weave along the shore, and shell middens and hollowed trees whisper of families unseen. The French can sense eyes watching. La will later write that these were ancient forests where the sound of an axe had never been heard. The stage is set for a meeting that will confound expectations. Would fear resurface, or could curiosity prevail? That's the question humming in every heart as oars slice the glassy water. The first thing the French notice isn't a person at all. It's the evidence of life. As small parties make their way along a worn aboriginal track that snakes through the heath, they find huts built from bark slabs leaned against blackened tree trunks. They spot charcoal-blackened circles in the sand, oyster shells piled high, and near one camp, a pile of bones with bits of charred flesh still clinging. Claude Riche, ever the scientist, crouches to examine them. He wonders aloud if the locals are cannibals, while another sailor, spooked by old European tales, fingers the butt of his pistol. Yet others recall that some cultures cremate their dead. Could this be a funeral rite rather than a feast? This uncertainty hangs in the salty air like mist. Later, scholarship suggests cremation was far more likely, but in that moment, misinterpretation could have turned curiosity to fear. It's a good reminder, mate. How often do we project our own fears onto people we barely understand? A century's worth of explorers had carried stereotypes of Africa and the Pacific into every new harbor. Here, the French decide to suspend judgment. They collect botanical specimens, marvel at towering eucalypts, and listen to the melodic call of black cockatoos. La writes that they were filled with admiration at the sight of these ancient forests, a landscape untouched by axe or plough. It feels, he notes, like stepping back to the dawn of time. And yet every midden and burned log tells them they are not alone. Each discovery, a woven basket, a pair of footprints, a band of painted ochre on a tree, is an invitation to stay cautious but hopeful. Then, one humid morning, movement flickers among the tea trees. A line of men appears, 42 strong by La Billardiere's count, walking in single file with women and children trailing at a distance. They form a semicircle on the sand, their bodies painted with charcoal and ochre, cicatrices etched along their shoulders. Every French heart pounds. Will the Tasmanians remember Marion's musket shots? The French leave their rifles behind and step forward empty-handed. What happens next is choreography without words. An elder advances, and the young French lieutenant bows his head and extends his arm. The elder touches the stranger's hand, then moves his own foot slightly behind him, signaling peace. Each man mirrors the gesture. It's as if two diplomats have just ratified a treaty without ink. The watchers let out the breath they didn't realize they were holding. La Billardière offers the old man a ship's biscuit. The elder sniffs it, turns it over, and takes a small bite, then shakes his head and hands it back. Another sailor boils water in a tin mug, and the steam astonishes the onlookers. Some laugh, others murmur. Moments later, the Tasmanians produce their own gifts, delicately threaded shell necklaces. These are treasures made by the women from tiny, canarid shells. A young French midshipman accepts one and slips it over his head. In exchange, he offers a neckcloth and a bright handkerchief. There's a ripple of amusement when he struggles to knot it properly. Soon, laughter rises above the surf. A week ago, these strangers might have hurled stones. Today, they're trading textiles and shellwork. That's how quickly fear can turn to fellowship. Over the next days, the two groups wander between camps like old neighbors. One afternoon, a tall hunter lifts a spear the length of 2 men and, with a flick of his wrist, sends it whistling nearly 100 paces. The shaft vibrates in the sand. French sailors erupt in applause. The man's companions grin. Their unarmed approach concealed a mastery of weaponry. In return, the French demonstrate their own technology, lighting tinder with flint and steel. The Tasmanians watch politely, but show more interest in the flapping chickens brought ashore. Language lessons break out. A curly-haired youth points at the ground and says, "Medi," then squats to indicate it means sit or pause. He beckons to his friends and calls "Tangara," a crisp phrase, urging them onward. The French repeat the words, laughing at their own clumsy tongues. In his journal, La Billardière jots them down alongside botanical names. His vocabulary lists will later fill whole pages. He notes that their speech is crisp and lively, articulated in the throat and delivered at a rapid pace. When they sing, he adds, it has a modulation reminiscent of Arab music. Meanwhile, daily life unfolds around them. Women dive into the cold bay, resurfacing with abalone, crayfish, and edible seaweed. They stay underwater longer than the sailors thought possible, their hands sure and quick. When they climb ashore, they deposit their catch on coals to cook. Men lounge by the fires, their spears laid aside, chatting and laughing. A French carpenter watches this and writes home that he's never seen such division of labor. In Europe, he muses, men would never let their wives do all the hard work. He doesn't realize that these divers are proud of their skills and that men contribute in other ways. While the French measure time by chronometers and bells, the Tasmanians agree to meet again after 2 revolutions of the sun, a poetic way of counting days that makes the sailors smile. It's a simple, elegant system in a world without clocks. Culture shocks lead to laughter as much as confusion. One of the ship's fiddlers brings his violin ashore and begins a jaunty European tune. Within moments, most of the Tasmanians clap their hands over their ears and grimace. They aren't being rude. The high-pitched strings sound like a screeching cat to unaccustomed ears. The fiddler stops, embarrassed, and then everyone bursts out laughing. Later, he tries a lower melody and a few children sway along. The French realize that music isn't a universal language after all. Artist Jean Piron sits cross-legged in the sand, charcoal and paper in hand, sketching the gathering. A young man beside him dips his fingers in cold ash and, with gentle pats, coats Piron's face and arms until he too is blackened. Another man leans forward and blows softly, sending a cloud of grey dust into the breeze. Piron laughs so hard he drops his pencil. In his finished drawing, you can see a French sailor playing with a Tasmanian toddler, tossing the child high while the mother looks on with an amused smile. Nearby, 3 hearths glow with crayfish roasting over coals. Baskets woven from seaweed sit ready to collect more shellfish. A Frenchman scratches at his scalp, dislodging a louse, and a Tasmanian elder picks it off, pops it between his teeth and bites down. There's a collective gasp, and then another wave of laughter. Hygiene practices differ, but humor bridges the gap. Even dance becomes a lesson. At dusk, a group of men begin a rhythmic performance. They raise one foot behind them, touch the back of their heads, bend low, then spring upright. Their voices are sonorous, limited to 2 tones somewhere between the notes B and G, yet utterly entrancing. The ship's chaplain records that he's reminded of Middle Eastern chanting. Off to one side, a priest whispers that perhaps he should dance at Sunday Mass. For all their differences, everyone finds something to smile about. Not every surprise is light-hearted. One morning, several Tasmanian women approach 2 young, beardless French sailors and begin to pat their faces and chins, murmuring among themselves. They tug at shirts, glance at the men's chests, and then peer beneath the waistcoats. The sailors freeze, unsure whether to laugh or flee. La Billardière realizes the issue. In Tasmanian culture, males typically have beards, so these smooth-faced youths look suspiciously feminine. After a thorough examination, the women burst out laughing and announce in their language that these are indeed men. The sailors blush scarlet, while their friends howl with mirth. The incident becomes dinner-table gossip for weeks. Through similar exchanges, the French come to understand that monogamy is the rule here. They had expected, as many European philosophers believed, that primitive people practiced polygamy. Instead, they see couples raising children with tenderness. An elder quietly corrects a young boy who has snatched more than his share of shellfish, then strokes the child's hair until the tears stop. A husband, noticing his wife shiver after a dive, wraps a wallaby pelt over her shoulders. A sailor writes that he has rarely seen such natural goodness, remarking on the loving treatment of children, the sharing of food and good humor. There is no sign of rigid hierarchy. Authority seems to flow from age and experience rather than force. Religious rites are absent, or at least invisible to foreign eyes. Conversations crackle with intelligence and inquisitiveness. The Tasmanians ask why the strangers' clothes don't stick to their skin and laugh when shown pockets. As day follows day, suspicion gives way to mutual respect. The French begin to call their hosts amiable and peaceful, overturning earlier tales of savagery. Rousseau's ideal of the noble savage seems to have come alive before them, though history will complicate that picture. The climax of this contact comes when the Tasmanians accept an invitation to visit the ships. They agree to come after 2 revolutions of the sun, and at the appointed time, a handful of men arrive at the water's edge. Nervously, they climb into a small boat and, gripping the gunwales, are rowed out to the towering hull of the Recherche. As they step aboard, wide-eyed, they are greeted by the crowing of a rooster. One man points and exclaims. When he's told it's good to eat, he nods enthusiastically and makes a chewing motion. He accepts the gift with delight. In the galley they see pigs, sheep, and goats, animals unknown to them. They stroke the smooth wood of the capstan and peer up the mast as if looking at a giant tree. On deck, a French sailor hands a visitor a heavy iron axe and shows him how to chip a notch into a log. The Tasmanian's eyes widen as the blade bites deep. Within minutes, he's chopping with competence, laughing at his own effort. Another sailor produces a burning glass, focusing sunlight onto dry tinder. A thin column of smoke appears. A curious Tasmanian reaches out to feel the heat and accidentally burns his thigh. He yelps, then grins, a pain that becomes a memory. La Billardière remarks that he will never forget the effect of the lens. Before returning ashore, the French distribute fishhooks and lines, explaining through gestures how they might relieve the women of some hard diving. There's a sense of generosity, and perhaps a hint of unintended disruption. Whenever technology crosses cultures, it brings unforeseen consequences. In the years to come, metal hooks, axes and guns will alter diets, economies and power balances across Tasmania. But for this moment on deck, under a bright sky, it feels like friendship sealed with a rooster and a ray of sunlight. As the ships weigh anchor and the Tasmanians melt back into the forest, La Billardière and his companions sit on deck, jotting notes and sketching memories. They have witnessed something rare, an encounter between peoples who were strangers but not enemies. The French have learned that the Lyluequonny are not the fearsome warriors conjured by Marion's volley of musket fire, but gentle, clever, resourceful folk. The Tasmanians have discovered that pale-faced visitors can laugh, trade, dance, and make mistakes. For a fleeting week, the bay echoed with shared songs and the slap of waves instead of gunshots. La Billardière's book, published in 1800, would paint the Tasmanians as amiable and peaceful, and inspire European philosophers and artists. Some, like the historian John Mulvaney, later argued that this contact humanized the Tasmanians in the European imagination. Yet such humanization did little to stop the dispossession that followed. Within a decade, sealers would raid these coasts. Within 30 years, British settlers would claim the land and drive most of its original custodians from their home. Diseases, violence and exile would reduce their numbers from hundreds to handfuls. The memory of that week in 1793 stands as a poignant contrast, a moment when equality seemed possible. And maybe that's why this story matters today. It reminds us that first impressions can be rewritten, that curiosity can trump fear, and that respect can bloom without shared language. When we read La Billardière's admiration of forests untouched by axes and his respect for families who shared everything, we glimpse the richness of cultures that thrived long before colonists arrived. As viewers, we're invited to listen deeply to voices once ignored. If you've enjoyed this journey through time and want to explore more hidden histories, don't be shy. Give this video a like, share it with a mate who loves a good yarn, drop your thoughts in the comments, and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next adventure. Thanks for sticking around, and until next time, take care and stay curious.